our next speaker, Dr. Francis Valloor. Francis is a consultant clinical psychologist in private practice, and he's trained and worked extensively in America, Asia, and Europe. He succeeded the very famous Anthony de Mello as director of the Sedana Institute of Psychology and Spirituality. It's an international center of excellence in leadership and personal transformation, and he's lectured in many universities and corporates around the world. He deals with difficult and complex cases. He also works with business leaders on how to bring kindness and compassion into the workplace. He's, for the last 30 years, taught awareness, mindfulness, and now uses it for personal and professional transformation. Francis is also the author of 6 books, an international speaker, and I've known Francis for over 15 years. I'd have to say he's kind, spiritual, with amazing insights into the human condition, and I have no hesitation recommending him. Francis, over to you.
Thank you, PJ. I have a number of people that I have known complaining about their work situation. It related to the long commute and the schedule of early morning rise, looking forward to the travel and arriving there already tired, and then doing a full day's work, and then complaining about some people. Often 1 or 2 people, obnoxious, they would say. If it weren't for them, at least it would have been a good place to work. Or they would find the work itself too challenging, demanding, etc. Even that they could cope. But people looking over my shoulders, they would say, that is too much for me. I would like to have some freedom there. And as if their prayers were answered some months ago, whether they liked it or not, they had to work from home. Now the complaint is different. Or it is too stressful working from home. Is there any way out of this one? What is stress? Stress is our body's reaction to changes within us or outside of us. These changes that we are confronted with, the mind, our body is trying to help us to cope as well as possible with them. Some of these changes would be, we'll notice the effect of that anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and so on. So many psychological effects of that people are experiencing. And sometimes or not sometimes, always, this is reflected in our bodies. The fatigue that people complain about, the sleep problems. There's a lot of sleep problems nowadays, and people getting sick because of this, and their ability to function well is compromised with this, and the ability also to bounce back from our difficulties becomes very challenging. What is it that is causing the stress in the working from home situation? One is the lack of structures that we have at workplaces that are absent right now. We have now freedom from controls and limits. That has changed into a feeling of being out of control. Flexible work hours have become too long working hours. Flexible sleep hours have become unhealthy sleep patterns for a large number of people. And social media has a tendency to diminish our hours of productivity. And then also friends and family tend to interrupt our work schedule. There's no way out of this except by imposing a structure on ourselves. We need to also to prioritize our work. If we say the most important and difficult things need to be done at first and finish them off, it will be easier for us to manage the rest of the day. It's also a reward that we give to ourselves, that satisfaction of finishing them. We also, using technology to structure our time and our tasks would be very helpful for us too. One challenging difficulty is now the blurring of the home and work situation. Inevitable in some ways. There's also people coming and disturbing us or calling. It may be friendly neighbors, maybe children, of course, and then other family members. These interruptions are all unscheduled and they eat into our work. When we have a distraction at work, as soon as the distraction is over, we don't get back to where we had left off. People who come in or interrupt you or call you at that time do not realize often that you are at work unless you tell them. And social media, television, emails, you name it, distractions from all kinds of things. Unless we set up our own boundaries when we work in this situation, nobody's going to do it for us. For many people, it's very difficult to say no to others, and to say it politely, say it nicely, but you have to say it. And the more important person to say no to, and more difficult often, is ourselves. To deny ourselves access to the social media at this time when we have to be working, or to say no to some people that we would like to talk to at this time. And also to regulate the media access at this time also is helpful. Work time is respected, and we may have to you do this by mimicking our work situation if we are away at work. During this time also, a lot of social isolation, loneliness that people are experiencing, feeling they are on their own now. There is nobody around them, and they miss people. Even that obnoxious person would do right now if they were there, because there's some companies better than no company at all working from home. There is also lack of support about the work situation that many people experience and making it more stressful. We have at work there were also what we might call water cooler moments, where we used to gather there, maybe just two people, sometimes exchanging some gossip or some connecting with people. This was actually very helpful. That is gone. We have to develop our own support network during this time. We have to have a social life of our own. Even in lockdown situation, we cannot afford to do without it. And perhaps social media, the very thing that I spoke against, can be beneficial for this situation when we need to be in contact with people. During this time, there's a lot of intensity of work, sometimes overwork. You have heard this before today, that people end up putting in a lot more time at work. In the recent LinkedIn study says that Irish people, on the average, are working 38 extra hours a month. That is equal to about a whole week extra, sometimes to prove their worth and value to the employer who may be struggling, or because they have to catch up. During this time also, the neglect of the body is very common. Self-neglect is very important to stop. There is need during this time for us to care for ourselves. How much leisure and relaxation are we building into our day? And are we taking good care of our nutrition and hydration and exercise needs? Or our sleep needs. Sleep is both bodily and psychologically very beneficial for us to have, very important for us to have. As I know from my experience of so many people, major difficulties arise because they are not sleeping well. And taking care of our inner space is important. What I mean by this is that we need to make sure that our emotions and our thinking process remain positive. The people that we associate with more often, it is very good for us, if we have a choice in the matter, to be surrounded by positive people. A lot of bad news going around, atmosphere of uncertainty, causing a lot of anxiety for people. It's important for us to take good care of this. And meditation is something that I find people are benefiting greatly during this time. I had other times too, for that matter. And an exceptionally important thing that are helpful for people, and I've seen some miracles taking place during this time, this period, for people who learn to connect with people differently during this time. Connect with people, care for people, even if you need care during this time. This helps. Care for animals, care for the plants in the garden, perhaps. This connection is very good for us. It nurtures us too. Also, about our mental health issue, so many people are experiencing difficulties, especially anxiety and depression during this time. So much is going on. Domestic violence, addiction issues are all happening right now. Please do something before it gets worse, because if you start early, you get a head start and you do well, and you handle it well. So what I am doing is making myself available for people for 15 minutes of a free conversation over Zoom, to see where you stand, if you need help, what you could do. So you're welcome. Crisis situations have a way of creating leaders, or showing who is a real leader and who is not. And true leaders always start with themselves. You cannot care for other people if you haven't cared for yourself first. Business leaders are people first. They have their bodies, their families, and now the extra challenge is caring for people in their care, their employees or their staff in a different kind of a way, even as their business is being challenged in a way that they have probably never experienced before. At this time, how much kindness and compassion do you have for yourself so that you take the steps that are needed for yourself? Would you then also at work think of people first rather than how efficient they are and how productive they are to shore up the business? Can you bring in some flexibility with compassion so that you are able to communicate some difficult things to people, but when you do it with kindness and compassion, when people feel that you are on their side, you value them, you support them, they will take a lot from you. Outcome studies in recent years have shown that when people feel valued and supported and appreciated, their functioning is much better, they are more efficient, more productive, and they get along very well at work. So it works in the long run, it is much better for us. It's good for us to show care for people by observing what is happening for them, by being in touch with them. Are they experiencing emotional or mental health issues more? If so, it's good for them, show that you're concerned for them by doing this. Very specific ways in which employers can help in this process also would be, is it possible at your place, at your work, to encourage people to mimic their workplace situation, like get up early as usual, normal work hours, normal work hour practices, take the breaks, lunch break, for example, that many people have a tendency to sit through and work, or even as we have the earlier speakers have talked about workplace, how are they arranging themselves? Is there some kind of a separation between home and work and so on? This will be very helpful for us to promote. To be in touch with people, to contact the people in your staff on a daily basis if possible, to not only to ask how are you doing kind of questions, but more important questions about them, their well-being, show that you are connected with them. And to be also at this time to be staying connected with your tab facilitator, because this could prove to be a lifeline for your business and for yourself. And showing interest in the well-being of people and how much they are caring for themselves is helpful. If you cannot organize something for people, like how do you organize their exercise or relaxation needs or possibilities for them to practice yoga? Yes, it is being done online, or meditation for them. If you cannot do it for them, at least helping them to find where they can have access to this. And finally, a big part of caring for ourselves would be caring for our mental health. When we are feeling anxious, when we are suffering in some way, it's good for us to pay attention to this. Not only ourselves as business leaders, but also for our staff, to help them to find where specialists are needed. If such a help is needed, I am also available for people, because many people are contacting me lately, especially nowadays, because of the situation that has caused additional stress for people. As I said, for everybody, I would give a 15-minute free session to help them to find what they need and the way forward. You're welcome. The last thing would be to say this. The attitude with which we are approaching this is very important for all of us, employees and employers. We are in it together, and to have the attitude of optimism in the middle of this, that this too will pass, and that we will deal with this, and we'll do everything in our power to remedy the situation and help one another as best as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. Most interesting. And I've got to say that Francis has been a great help to me over the years. There's, as a business leader, there's good stress and bad stress, but knowing the difference between them is very important. And in TAB, in fact, we also have a stress test for if you have employees which you think may be under stress. It can be a useful little test to do. It's an online test. What it does indicates the source and the severity, but what it tells us is when a clinical intervention is required, because we often have people who are stressed and we don't know what to do with it. We found it very useful that many of our TAB members have. I'm going to introduce Martin Kelly. Martin is let me just bring it up. Martin has held senior leadership positions in technology in various companies right around the world. He's incredibly well qualified. I'm going to be very brief, and has acted as essentially in very senior leadership positions right around the world, finishing up as the head of vice president of information technology of Citrix, running staff all over the world. Martin has some practical tips with us, and I'm just going to hand you over to Martin, who I know will be brief.
Thank you, PJ, and hello, everyone. And I will be brief. As PJ said, I've spent pretty much my entire career in the technology industry and worked for a company, Citrix, which sold technology that enabled remote working. So I've been doing it for over 10 years. And in my last position at Citrix, I had over 200 people around the world. All bar one or two were remote from me. So what I thought I'd do this morning was just give you a little bit of some of the practical experience. I must say that a lot of the content covered already is already very practical and useful tips. I suppose the one thing that's a little different about this experience is that pretty much everybody is working remotely now. So you don't have that dynamic of some people being in the office and some being remote. So in some ways it's it's a lot easier actually, because if you're a person remote but everybody else is in the office, you definitely have that FOMO or fear of missing out syndrome. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm assuming that what was covered previously around, making sure that the office setup and the technology and all of that, I'm assuming that that's in place, because obviously that's the fundamental starting point. But the main message I want you to take from today is that it's really about, from the point of view of how to be effective, the leadership skills and talents that are needed to be effective working in the office are also very similar to the leadership skills that are needed when working remotely. So it's important to recognize that people should try and build on the skills and talents and leadership approach that they have, but tweak it to allow for a remote capability. So the first thing, the types of skills that typically a leadership would have in setting direction, planning, delegating, communicating, building trust and motivation, they're all extremely relevant in a remote environment. But what you do need to do is think about being very deliberate about how you can do that, because most leaders will have developed their current style in an office setting. It's often based heavily on leading by example, relying on lots of face-to-face contact, often using informal open door policy, using good intuition, judgment, reading people, and so on. And all of that's a little more difficult. But some of the things that help to make that more practical in the real world, in a remote context, I would just call out just very briefly. The first is around planning, right? So working from home is different. So I think it's important to adjust the approach and to be patient. So the first step in that, I would suggest, is understanding the people that you're managing working from home. And it's interesting that we sometimes do profiles of people's home office environment, but it's important to also do a profile of the people on the team that you're managing and the type of communication styles that works best for them. And at TAB, we do a personality assessment that looks in that, and it's a very useful tool to be able to say, okay, in dealing with person A, the style that works best is A, B, or C, so that you have that toolkit, if you like, in your bag. The second one is around delegation. I think this is something that was covered a little earlier, but I couldn't stress it more. It's important to focus on results and output rather than on process. So that allows people, as part of the setting up of the exercise, is to understand and have clarity around the roles and responsibilities and accountabilities, and then delegate. Leave people at it, let them do it, and worry about the results of what they're doing rather than what they're actually doing at the moment. And feeding into that is the whole concept of trust. And I was talking to my accountant last week and asked him how it was going, and he was really animated and said, I have no idea what people are doing most of the time. I was thinking that kind of lack of trust or lack of visibility was really unnerving him. But I think if you turn it around and focus on results and output, and don't micromanage, let people do it at and when works best for them, will definitely lead to a more effective relationship. And the final 2 points I'll cover is really around communication. We're a little short on time, so I'll keep it very, very brief. But the first thing I'd say is use shorter meetings. Try, you know, in the office, it's very often the standard meeting time is an hour. It's way too long. If you're going to do meetings with people, try and keep them shorter. Do short sprint meetings, but do them more regularly. And secondly is to be communicate in a more deliberate way. So create times that are not necessarily business related, but just to check in with people, and use formal or less formal means of communication, like, you know, WhatsApp or Slack or Teams or text or whatever way you have of just being able to keep in touch with people to make sure that they're okay, or if they need something that they don't necessarily want to put up their hand and ask for, but an informal communication style that allows for that level of interaction that you might have in an office environment where someone just pops in or you bump into them over the water cooler or over coffee or whatever. Create that type of environment using technology with informal methods like WhatsApp and Teams and so on. And finally, just bring a bit, you know, at the end of the day, it's about people we're social animals, having a bit of fun, and try and create some element of communication that involves unwork related things, quizzes, whatever, embarrassing scenarios you can create for people to have a bit of fun, to just lighten the mood a little. So sorry I've rushed through that, but we're a little tight on time, but happy to take any questions, or if anybody wants to reach out to talk more about, you know, what has worked for me over the last 10 years. Thank you very much.
Great, Martin. Look, thank you very much. You were very brief there.